Hi everybody. In this chapter, we're going to talk about how national economic and institutional environment affect the business operations of multinational corporations. Before we talk about today's topic, let us think about the following three examples. First, as you may know, a social network company like Facebook, known as global company, operates its business internationally without geographic boundaries. However, you cannot find the Facebook website in China except Hong Kong. Second, in a country like India, an American food multinational, McDonald's, does not own farmland for lettuce, tomato, onion, and potato, but rather they order their food materials to local farmers, which may possibly raise an issue of supply chain management. Third, there is no Apple's retail stores in African countries. But then now think about the reasons why there is no Facebook in China, why multinationals do not own farmland in India, and why there is no such thing as Apple's retail store in African countries. The answer lies in the national economic and institutional environment. So basically, we will talk about how the political or institutional and economic systems are different across countries. And from a practitioner's standpoint, how can we know the difference of political and economic systems between countries? So we will talk about the element and the measurement of the institutional and economic environment of a country so that we can better compare the difference of these environments between countries. Finally, we will talk about how institutional and economic environment affect multinationals' international expansion and operation. To start with, we need to understand the meaning of political economy first. It is actually two different words, politics and economics. But think about why do we use it as one word, political economy? Simply put, think about Trump administration's trade policy and its impact on our economies. We recently imposed 25% of tariff on Chinese steel product import. In return, Chinese government imposed retaliation tariff. It led to so-called a trade war between the two countries. The trade war has a significant impact on our economies. Due to the increased tariff, the price of steel products goes up, and it has made American firms, especially those in auto industry, hard to maintain their pricing strategy. We may learn from this example that policymakers' decisions influence economies of a nation, and vice versa. This is why we use political economy as one word, and therefore we need to understand both politics and economies. Now, let us talk about the political system of a nation. Generally speaking, there are two different types of political systems, democratic and totalitarian, based upon the basic unit of a social organization, whether a nation is collectivism or individualism. Individualistic countries such as the United States and Canada tend to be more democratic, whereas collectivistic countries tend to be more totalitarian. China, for example, is a totalitarian country where there is only one political party, which is Communist Party. And the country China is also a collectivistic country where the groups or social goal is more important than individuals' goal. Since the totalitarian country emphasizes a national goal, individuals' rights and freedoms are restricted to some extent. For instance, in China, freedom of speech is quite limited, so you are not supposed to share your political opinions with others. There was actually Facebook in China, but it was banned in 2009 because Facebook users used the website to post and share their political opinions. But remember, your postings may be monitored by Chinese government. Another characteristic of a totalitarian country is that you cannot buy and own a land because it is basically state-owned. Here the state-owned means that government has the ownership of the land. So you can rent the land for residential use for 70 years and 40 years for industrial or commercial use. After the 40 and 70 years of use, the land will have to be returned to the government. So you have to renew the contract before it is expired and returned to the government. Now, here is the assignment question number 1. In a country like India, an American food multinational, McDonald's, does not own farmland for lettuce, tomato, onion, and potato, but rather they order the food materials to local farmers, which may raise an issue of supply chain management. To think about, why does McDonald's not own land for food materials? And if this is part of government restriction on multinational corporations, then what are the reasons for such regulations? Let's talk about economic systems of nations. Basically, there are 3 economic systems: market-based system, planned, aka command economies, and mixed economies. So as you may know, market-based economies, simply put, is a free market economy where the price of a product is determined by the interaction of demand and supply, and all productive activities are privately owned. So you can buy a land or own a land and run your own business without much government intervention or restrictions. So under the market-based economies, you can monetize your assets and properties regardless of whether it is tangible or intangible. You may freely use franchise and licensing agreement for your business, and the business contract law is advanced and well developed. On the other hand, command economies, like former China, their government owns land and companies known as state-owned enterprise, and they plan the production activities for goods and service to their citizens. As long as government takes control of almost all economic activities, it is known as less efficient economies. Mixed economies is one in between these two. Certain sectors of the economy are privately owned, while other sectors are still government owned. India and China are the typical example of mixed or transition economy. As just mentioned, the business contract law under market-based economy is advanced and well developed. On the other hand, contract law and intellectual property protection law in planned or mixed economies are not well developed. Since the government still has direct control over their assets and properties, they believe that it is not necessary to develop contract and intellectual property protection law. So that's why it has always been a challenging issue for multinationals to operate their business in mixed economies. But now, in the era of globalization, it is imperative for countries of mixed economies to develop contract laws and intellectual property protection law as they open their market for multinationals. Because reliable institutional environment is one of the important factors attracting multinationals and their business operations. So with that being said, the development of institutional environment is one of the critical business environments that multinationals must consider before they operate their business in the host country. And the question is, how do multinationals know or they technically measure the development of institutional environment of a nation? Here is useful indicators that we can use, which is developed by the World Bank. So it basically measures the development of institutional environment of a nation. In the following table, you will see the 4 items. political stability, government effectiveness, control of corruption, and intellectual property protection. And the score of each item is ranged between negative 2.5 and positive 2.5. Positive being that their country is politically stable, they effectively control corruption, and then they tend to have strong intellectual property protection law. Negative sign, on the other hand, represent unstable political environment. One country is corrupted, and then the countries relatively have weak intellectual property protection law. So using the updated data, I created this table. So as you can see, emerging markets such as BRICS, Brazil, Russian Federation, India, and China tend to have a negative score for those 4 items. If you're a high-tech company with intellectual property and are thinking of entering into one of these countries, you need to carefully evaluate your target country's institutional environment. Now, in relation to this, here is the assignment question number 2. You know, the Netflix. Netflix has launched its streaming service almost all countries in the world, except few countries, including North Korea, Syria, and China. But now, Netflix is trying to approach the Chinese government for potential market penetration. So why do you think there has been no Netflix in China? Do you think launching the streaming service in China is a good market expansion strategy for Netflix? If no, then why not? And if yes, then what institutional or market factors do Netflix need to carefully evaluate? Now, consider the economic environment of a nation. Multinational corporations prefer to enter emerging countries such as China and India for their manufacturing activity. Then now think about which country other than China and India would be the ideal location for manufacturing activity for multinationals. In other words, which is the emerging market or emerging country other than China or India? To figure out the potential manufacturing locations, we need to be able to classify the world economy. To classify the world economy, first, you need to measure the level of economic development of a nation by GDP, gross domestic product. So the GDP per capita represents the production capability as well as the income level of a country. Based on the GDP, you should be able to classify the world economy into 3: developed, developing, and emerging economies. If you look at the tables, you will see which country has a high or low GDP per capita and its growth rate. Developed economies or developed countries tend to have a high GDP per capita. Think about the United States. Our productivity level is very high because of availability of well-educated and highly skilled workers. And therefore, the income level is very high compared to other advanced nations. Developing countries, literally, are developing their economies. The income level of developing countries tend to low, and the production capability is also lower than that of developed countries. Emerging economies also belongs to developing countries, but the difference between the two is that emerging economies tend to have above average GDP growth rate, representing that the speed of economic growth is very fast. If you look at the GDP growth rate of BRICS, known as emerging countries, you will see a very high GDP growth rate. As mentioned earlier, politics influence economies of a country and vice versa. Therefore, these two are highly correlated. Increasing number of countries are transitioning their economies as they open and liberalize their markets and becoming more democratic. Democratic countries tend to be more economically developed because they are more likely to open and liberalize their market and remove foreign direct investment regulations. Totalitarian countries, on the other hand, tend to be developing their economies as they focus more on protecting their industry and market, and are reluctant to open their market to multinationals. Now, let us apply what we have just learned to the real business case. Walmart, as you know, is one of the top retailers of the United States. Walmart is also known as multinational corporation as they have many subsidiaries in different countries. Take a look at the video clip below and try to understand India's economic environment and its retail industry. Now, let me just give you a brief background of Walmart operation in India. Walmart entered in India's retail industry in 2007 through the formation of 50-50 evenly split joint venture with an Indian local partner, Bharti, which is a telecommunication company. And they launched it, as can be seen from the image, the best price. Unlike Walmart in our country, the best price is wholesale only, meaning that you cannot walk in best price, but rather wholesalers such as company or institutional buyers who purchases a significant amount of a product can go shopping at best price. Later in 2008, Bharti opened a new retail convenience store, Each Day. After several years of joint venture collaboration between the two companies, unfortunately, Walmart decided to terminate the joint venture relationship because of high restrictions on foreign investment. Given this background information, try to think about the following questions. We will discuss these questions in class. First, why did Walmart form a joint venture with Bharti, although the company Bharti is specialized in telecommunication technology and operating in telecommunication industry? Second, why did Walmart have to form a joint venture? Walmart actually could have operated its business on its own without a partnership. Third, why did they form a 50-50 evenly split joint venture, not 40-60 joint venture? Finally, why was it wholesale only?